Welcome back to those of you in the room who are with us for the previous discussion, and welcome to those of you in the room and those of you watching online who are joining for the first time here today. Welcome to the Jewellery Confederation, or CIBJO's Jewellery Industry Voices seminar series. We've been running these seminars online since 2020 and also every year at VICENZAORO. Thank you again to the Italian Exhibition Group and especially Marco Carniello and his team for inviting the World Jewellery Confederation, CIBJO, to be here to present our seminar series. We're very grateful for all the hospitalities to be here in Vicenza. And also for all of you celebrating Konghei Fa Choi or Gongxi Fa Chai for Lunar New Year in China and across the world. My name is Edward Johnson from Gemfields. I'm the usual moderator for the Jewellery Industry Voices seminar series. But today, my role simply is to introduce our moderator this morning. Lisa Koenigsberg from New York, from the Initiatives for Art and Culture, has very graciously flown all the way from New York to be with us today, to initiate and lead this conversation with the wonderful panel that we have here today in the room, and also with Sarah Fabergé, who's joining us online. Thank you for joining, Sarah. So my job this morning is done. Thank you very much for joining. Lisa, I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for your collaboration and encouragement and support of CIBJO, and I'm looking forward to future work between CIBJO and the IAC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward, for that very gracious welcome. And thank you, Gaetano, for your fabulous hospitality and great warmth. It's immensely appreciated. And now I want to turn to my exceptional panel, one of whom is joining us virtually, and introduce them briefly. So, Alice Cicolini is here from London. She's a designer whose jewelry has employed one of the traditions and skills of the last Jaipuri Meenakari. Can we say chanlevé enamel? Yes. So that's the definition for the technique behind Meenakari. So anyway, going back to this bit ungainly, skill of the last Jaipuri Meenakari, trained enamel traditions of Persia passed down through family generations for over 200 years. We are also joined by Sarah Fabergé, the head of the Heritage Council and director of special projects at Fabergé, and Vincenzo Liverino to my left from Torre del Greco and the owner of a family-owned coral company, and he's committed to preserving the legacy, the historic legacy of his family and town in the business, and has founded one of the world's great historic jewelry collections and a museum about which we'll hear more. And then finally, I'm going to anglicize, if that's all right, but I'm happy to do it either way. Alice Vanni, Alice Vanni, who is Director of Sustainability and Compliance Manager at Italpreziosi. So this is our exceptional panel, and we're going to jump right in to the topic at hand, which has been laid out, if you will, as sustainability through successful transition. One could actually maintain that since survival is at the heart of sustainability, to have succession is to achieve an aspect of sustainability. So what I'd like to do is first off turn to Enzo. Would you share the thinking behind the generational approach to your family's coral company and how that has worked, beginning with the establishment of the company with your great-grandfather in 1894?
I think that it was the coral that everybody knows that coral is bring lucky, no? And for this reason, I think that we was lucky to establish this company. My grand-grandfather have the opportunity to have a good reputation because we start to work since the last century with Bulgari, Cartier, big brand. And then this knowledge goes from my grandfather to my grandfather, then to my father. Of course, I didn't know my grandfather, but from my father I learned a lot. He teach me all the things regarding the coral, the technique, all his knowledge. And this gave me the possibility to travel all around the world, and this passion I passed to my two sons that are working with me in the factory, and give me the opportunity to let people know more about coral.
And we'll come back to that legacy later in the conversation. Sarah, if I might turn to you. After approximately 100 years that included the Russian Revolution and, if you will, a challenge to the brand's jewelry identity through its having become associated with fashion, cosmetics, perfume, and hair products, members of today's Fabergé family, who have had the experience of working in the jewelry industry, were brought together to inject their knowledge and advice to the new owners of the brand. So today, as head of Fabergé's Heritage Council, how did this process play out for you?
Thank you. And I think it was really interesting, first of all, to hear what Enzo was saying, because having that inspiration from your family is so important. Although, as you say, we had a large gap when we were separated for so many reasons from that industry as such, I grew up with a father who was very enthusiastic about the arts and educating me in things Fabergé, but also other fine craftsmanship. So that was a wonderful link, if you like. Although my father was working with Fabergé Style Company, we didn't have, as you know, the trademark then. We weren't reunited with the trademark until 2007. And then we had our relaunch in 2009, because as we know, 2008 wasn't the best year for relaunching a luxury brand. And I think listening to the previous panel, I know we're all having slightly different topics here at VICENZAORO, but listening to the previous panel's final statements, that really sums it up in many ways, because it's about your passion, finding your fit. So I was asked to advise and guide the new owners of the brand to relaunch the company. But then you work with experts, you make sure you know you're working with people who not only know what they're doing, but have a passion for Fabergé, because I think it is very much like many jewellery companies that are together here today. It's a passion for your personality, your brand personality, and who you are and what you are, and then how do you take that forward? Right. So it's working with a strong team and finding your own personal fit. What can you offer that brand?
Sarah, that's a wonderful future-oriented and future-directed answer. And hopefully we'll come back to what your relationship, if you will, to the Fabergé DNA, if you want to call it that, and actually how that was transmitted forward. Because we certainly understand the passion and the commitment and the heritage and the idea of digging deep for that. I also want to make reference to the panel before. I want to say how fortunate I feel to have three very strong women panelists. And I'd like to say that that was not pinkwashing. That was not a factor in the selection of panelists. And so having said that, I'd like to turn to Alice Vanni, Alice, as the next in line to a female-founded enterprise, your mother's. What were the ways in which gender impacted the landscape your mother encountered and her thinking and Italpreziosi's approach to gender equality?
Thank you, Lisa. So my mother, Ivana Ciabatti, which many will know here, has founded Italpreziosi in 1984. And as it is today, unfortunately, the field she has been working, which is more on the supply chain, upstream and refining side, it has always been very male-dominated. So at the beginning of her journey, it hasn't been easy at all, because also to be taken in consideration. But as she always tells to me, and as she always says in all the association to take part, usually, we are the first one that create an obstacle to underestimate ourselves. And when you overpass the first obstacle, and that the first obstacle and determination, you can pass whatever obstacle you can find in your path. So that's what she did. And underestimation, no. And she made it to become one of the most considered women in the refining and upstream market. In fact, last year she has been also awarded by Women in Mining within the 100 inspirational women in the world for her work on sustainability. So if you dream and you're determined, you can get where you want. Said that, she has, of course, applied everything she knew it was necessary for gender equality within the company, but also outside the company, in the supply chain and in the community engagement. Within the company, I can tell concretely, we are like around 42 women working, and there's a good representation in the management and, of course, in the leadership, as she is the chairperson right now in the company. And women inside the company and gender equality has been one of the main focus because of the challenges she has been facing. She wanted to empower first within the company, giving training, formation, the possibility to constantly improve in the career. And also, for example, on maternity, since last year we introduced a coaching counseling for when women were coming back from maternity, they could understand that maternity is like a master. You get skills, you don't lose time. So this is just an example on how gender equality within the company has worked. And in the community, she has been supporting through Italpreziosi, initiative that fights against violence against women, and they give prize to women that has the courage to stand up. And in the supply chain, we do a lot of training, formation, and we try to get as much data of how many women we are working in the supply chain, which are now available publicly in our sustainability report. So an holistic view on gender equality and human rights.
And again, we'll have a chance to come back a bit to your legacy, or to the business's legacy, as we circle around in the conversation. And Alice, who is wearing examples of her wonderful work, can you compare your experience as a curator and jewelry designer working with jewelry craftspeople in the UK and India? How each of them perceives their role differently in terms of transferring skill to the next generation?
So I'm going to take that question in pieces, I think. So,
Right.
I mean, you know, my role as a curator was something that I did until I was 35. And of course, curators are there, I think, in order to be conservers of heritage, but equally advocates for the contemporary relevance of living, tangible objects. So I was really telling stories with a kind of long arc, if you like, but also a kind of shorter arc of contemporaneity. What's the relevance of all these incredible skills in the contemporary marketplace? I had a very particular job as a curator, actually. I worked for an organisation called the British Council. It was a non-governmental organisation, part of the British government, kind of. And really my job was to tell stories about Britain, but very specifically through the lens of design, if you like. Could you tell a story about cultural identity through objects and practice? And so I think my kind of perspective on this idea of succession comes very much through, if you like, the kind of refraction of that time that I spent as a curator. I think we're all very familiar with conversations around geographical identity. You know, we talk a lot about champagne being something that's very specifically to do with a region and the ownership of that region, but equally how that industry defines what that region sees itself as being, its perception in the world. And, you know, I have the very great privilege of working with master craftsmen in Jaipur and also in Hatton Garden, and those two are places that I believe are completely steeped in the language of jewellery. Without jewellery, what are those places? You know, so I think when I started to practice as a designer, this idea about sustainability being as much about the sustenance and preservation and, if you like, the life of skill is as important to the sustainable, ethical, material supply chain argument, because without the skill, what's the point of having ethically sourced gemstones and fair trade metals? And I think, you know, there's a tendency that I have seen as perhaps an outsider. You know, I'm not from a jewellery family, you know, and my parents were English language teachers, you know, to believe that skills in jewellery are a given. They'll always be there. There'll always be craftsmen who can make beautiful things. And actually our only job is to make sure that the materials we put in front of them are kind of, you know, more ethically sourced. And I really don't believe that, having worked in places like India, where obviously, you know, so much of it is more small scale, you know, lots of small craftsmen working in their own shops. And actually their sustainability is there enough business for my son to find it relevant to continue in this industry? And I'm afraid to say that in very many cases, the answer to that question is no. And if we don't, as an industry, start to focus on telling the really quite serious importance of sustaining skill, then actually what we lose is considerably greater than the ability to make a nice jewellery object. What we lose is a whole kind of segment of what we consider to be our cultural identity. And so, you know, there is a difference, I think, between the two areas where I work. In Jaipur, my Meenakari artisan was himself adopted into the family because there were no sons for his father. And he now has 2 daughters. And we will come on to that later, but certainly I think within his practice, he considers himself to be the last in his family. Whereas my master craftsman in Hatton Garden, who has been working in the trade for 50 years, has 2 young women that he's training up to take over his business, and he's very proud to be sustaining his industry in that way. So,
yeah, my family is not in the jewelry business either, and one of the things that I feel very strongly is that these skills and talents and, if you will, regional exceptional abilities, we need to broaden our concept of natural resources to include those things in them, because if we lose that, we've lost something that's so precious we can't get it back. So in line with this sort of thinking, I'm wondering, sort of back to the paradox of the future, but looking back, Enzo, what are the qualities and skills that were transferred from previous generations to you and that you nurture today with respect to artisanry and the way that you train the next generation?
Well, I remember when I was 7, 8 years old, and after the study, I liked to stay in the factory and see the worker, how they cut, how they make round, how they drill the coral. I was lucky because I was the son of the owner, so they teach me. They was not jealous. They never teach to other. In that time, they drill the coral with by hand, like they still make now in Bahrain on the natural pearl. Then, when I was 18, 19 years old, my father sent me to Japan, to China, to buy coral and to buy pearl. So I saw the new technology they use to drill the pearl, and I bring it home. Then I went in China. I saw how they make round beads more quickly and more easy. And I bring this technology at home. Then I understand that we need new technology. And my father gave me the opportunity to put in the factory. But we need the people who know how to use. And then my father said, okay, let's open a school. And my father was the founder of the first school to learn young people to carve and to work at the coral. Then he said, we should do this, because from this business, from the coral, we get a good reputation, respect, and also the possibility to have some money in the bank. So we have to give back to the people who work at the coral and to Torre del Greco. We have to give back something. That's the reason why he opened the school, and because the life gave me the opportunity to meet the right people like Gaetano and to let this business, the coral business, grow up and can still see the future in the coral business.
Well, we'll come back again throughout this conversation to the paradox or the blending of the past and the future, especially in your business and in Torre del Greco. Sarah, I'd like to ask you about how you go about championing and conserving fine craftsmanship today. How were you able to, if you will, maintain and transmit the Fabergé craftsmanship, given the disconnect that came about as a result of history, if you will, and other historical events and other events?
Okay, yes. Well, in the early part of the relaunch, or prior to the relaunch of Fabergé, we spent a great deal of time seeking out people who still use the same craft as Fabergé, in particular the guilloché enamel technique, which is so synonymous with Fabergé. It's not the only technique that's used, but it is very much part of our DNA. And so there was a lot of looking around and scoping out to see who are the best people at this. And we're delighted to be working with a company which is also a heritage company, great-grandfather to grandson. And we work with a company in Germany who have not had the break that we had and still continue those fine guilloché enamel techniques. We also work with a Swiss watchmaker who created Our Lady Compliqué watch for us. He had a very special movement, and I think this is not trying to sound in any way pompous, but I think the Fabergé name, regardless of what happened, regardless of me or what we're doing today, does have a life of its own, which is what we named our documentary. And so people are often keen to work with Fabergé because they admired the past, but they want to help us to take it into the future and to maintain those standards and the creativity and the skills. But going back to what Alice was saying about looking at preserving the tangible pieces that make up jewellery, she's absolutely right about preserving the craftsmanship and the skill. And I would also go further with that into saying nurturing creativity and allowing those ideas to thrive in a corporate world where we are, of course, always pushed to make a profit. Of course, we're running a business, but sustaining not only those tangible elements, but sustaining and nurturing creativity, because I think Fabergé of the past was not only about the wonderful craftsmanship, but the sparks and the ideas that flew out of the company. And that's very much about what we're championing today. So celebrating the creativity and listening to each other and working together for ideas, but scoping out to these craftspeople wherever they are, who are in tune with us, and then helping them to understand what we're trying to achieve today.
Well, to draw on what you're saying, this panel couldn't have been positioned more optimally given the one that we just followed. And speaking to your comments about Fabergé and what it stands for, and that it has a life of its own as a name, I think that's one of the things about houses, about, I guess, what people now are calling brands, but maison, what have you, that have these fantastic heritages upon which they draw, but also that, in a sense, live independently, kind of in the mind and in the heart. So, Alice Vanni, I wonder also if you could tell us, in a slightly different way, how your mother imbued her values in the company and transferred them to the new generation. So perhaps less about gender, and maybe, although not to exclude it, and more about some other aspects of your corporate focus.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, to introduce on these and on her value, I would like to say that she is always proud to talk about her past and her family past, because she's not coming from nor the jewelry sector or the gold sector in the family. Her family was a farming family, a family of farmers in the Tuscan countryside. And she proudly say that the difficulty that she could have when she was younger shaped her character and her determination, and the values that the family taught her were crucial in that, especially dignity and respect. And so this has completely shaped the vision of Italpreziosi towards all the ESG side, and he transmit that to the family, to me, which now I'm taking care of all the social part, because she wanted a specific person to be taking care of all this ESG and sustainability, to transmit and keep on going with the mission. So how the vision went, dignity, human dignity, it's important because it's related to human rights. And also the respect for the environment, of course, being that she also grew up in the beautiful Tuscan countryside. She's always wanted to keep and preserve the environment for the future generation, as it was found. So this has led to the use of the least impact machineries for the refineries, and also collaboration in the supply chain, because we know that most of the impact, usually, especially when we talk about biodiversity and climate and human rights, is coming from the supply chain. And she has been working hard during these last 30 years, just when she started to travel and to understand what was behind the supply chain. That's where she said, we need to do something. And despite she was a woman in the middle of Tuscany in Italy, she didn't care. She started to collaborate with as much people to make sure that this could have been changing. And this has been properly transmitted, I can tell, within the vision of the company.
Alice, how do you, Cicolini, how do you see your role with regard to the transference of knowledge, and how it's optimally, if you will, sort of you engage with the craftsman? Do you present concepts and ideas that are executed with a technique, or does what is presented need to somehow be rooted in the culture and heritage?
So I think a lot of what I bring to the craftsmen that I work with is the idea of kind of evolution, not revolution. You know, very much as what Sarah was saying. You know, it's not enough to preserve things, and actually preservation can be almost like death to a living tangible heritage. You have to find ways to evolve. And as Enzo was saying, within his family, he brings in different kinds of technology and technological innovation, and pushing the craft forward is a very key way of doing that. So in London, I work with my enameler to figure out what is it we can do with lacquer enamel that you can't do with vitreous enamel, that will help to evolve the audience's understanding of the value of that material and the skill that he brings to it. So we're setting color inside color without having to have boundaries. We are doing marbled enamel. We're doing all sorts of innovative things because that's his excitement as a craftsman. So I'm feeding, if you like, off his energy. But in the Indian context, I found very much that one of the mistakes that people make when they try to work with craftsmen in India is that they come with their concepts. Here you are, make that. And the Indian craftsman sitting there going, well, I don't know, what is this thing? What is it going to be for? I don't understand it. It doesn't speak to me. So, a lot of it is to do with respect. I spent a year sitting in India with my Meenakari artisan to understand where does he come from as an artist. He's an artist. He's not a machine. And so he talks about his practice as painting on gold. And actually, my practice as a designer is to paint on paper. And so this is where we began, from this point of shared collaboration. And everything that we have made together grows out of that. But of course, what I'm asking him to do is to work with patterns from all over the world, not just from India. I'm bringing new colors. I'm bringing all sorts of different ways of thinking about things. I'm turning the relationship between the stone and the enamel around. So the enamel is the jewel, the stone is the container, all sorts of things that he would never have done on his own. And I think that's, if I would say anything, it's really about kind of respectful, collaborative exchange within a context of kind of future-looking innovation.
Sarah, I'm wondering if there's something you'd like to add to that, given the sort of Fabergé situation.
Absolutely. I think we have a lot in common. We all do, but Alice, I think that whole idea of relationship building, because that's key. I think it's key across our business. Listening to each other and understanding each other and knowing where we come from. I mean, in part of my other life, I'm a Myers-Briggs practitioner. I've worked in learning and development, and it's all about using someone's skills, preserving those skills, and then helping them to understand what you're trying to achieve, which is exactly what you were just saying, I think. So those relationships, that collaboration, is so important. It was important to my great-grandfather. It's important to us today. And that collaboration goes right out as far as working with the people that are creating the pieces for you, working heavily for me with our design team, and then transmitting those stories right out to what I do as a brand ambassador, which is going out to our partners, either our partners or our clients at private events, and telling them the story about that relationship with the craftsperson, about how it's made, about the different techniques, about the complications, so that they can understand, going back to what we were saying before, that it's not just a number of pieces of perhaps valuable or not so valuable stones and pieces put together, but they're understanding the creativity, they understand that story behind that design, that preciously, carefully designed piece, that they understand the story behind it, and then they have a meaningful piece of jewellery that will be their legacy, they can keep, they can hand on. It is sustainable in that it's going to go forward for generations, and that's what makes it all happen. I think that those relationships, you need a bit of psychology in all business, but you particularly need that, I think, when you're working with craftspeople and craftsmen and women who have their own idea too. And I think that's the same with our business. I'm sorry to go back to a little bit of a question you asked before, Lisa, but the thing that I've been trying to protect is not having people come in now to Fabergé and saying, that's a great name, we can do great things with that. Let me put my blueprint on top of you. No. Trying to be a strong woman and saying, no, we don't want your idea, your blueprint from another company on top of Fabergé. We need Fabergé to be Fabergé today as it is, not dusty, not under a dome, not stuck somewhere in a museum, but the Fabergé company today is about being current and alive we're nothing without our heritage, but that fine balance between the two in order to move forward in a way that will be sustainable and that will be worthy of the name.
What I'd like to do now is to turn to a theme that seems to be an umbrella for the morning, and that is this notion, if you will, of sustainability or responsible practice. And successful succession enables an enterprise to be sustained in the business, in the business sense, to go forward, to exist, to have its life. Part of that, perhaps more evident today, is the necessity to be mindful with regard to environmental and social responsibility in practice, or sustainability. And each of you has your own engagement with this, and I'd like to go back the farthest in time with you, Enzo, to ask about the relationship of the success of your business and your engagement as president of CIBJO, of the CIBJO Coral Commission, and the work you've been doing in terms of environmental coral.
Thank you. Nice question. Let me say that I was lucky to have two sons that work in the company, and one is there, Andrea. So they give me the opportunity to let people know what is the coral, why is sustainable, and so on. And this was possible because of Gaetano Cavalieri understand, I think 8 years ago, that the coral need a commission. And we start. In a couple of years, we made the Blue Book with all the rules, nomenclature, classification, treatment, explanation, classification of the 8 species of precious coral, the map, so a lot of information. Then I think I'm very lucky in the life. I have the first opportunity to meet Gaetano, and then Master Ken Scarratt, that helped me a lot in the Coral Commission to make the DNA of coral through university in Naples to give the 100% possibility to GEMLab to identify the origin of that kind of species. And then also thanks to Ken, we have made the color grading of the coral, precious coral, and other things will come out. We are working now on the coral guide, but all these things give us the opportunity, the possibility to make educational, sending information to people who take a decision. Many brands before was afraid to use precious coral because they misunderstanding the common coral, reef coral with the precious coral. Then we have CIBJO as a reference. CIBJO, everybody respects CIBJO. So what CIBJO say should be true. And they start to have confidence in precious coral. Just add one thing. To underline the difference between a deep precious coral and reef common coral, the Coral Commission decided I think 4 years ago in Bogota, at the Congress in Bogota, to move on because the rule, the classification was already made. The Blue Books was made. Then we have to go on the sea to help the reef coral. And this we have made working together the Monaco, Monte Carlo Scientific Center that works under the Prince Albert and and also the other gem lab to understand how, studying the precious coral, we can help the reef coral to survive, the reef coral.
Sort of a flip side to this, or adjacent to it, is one of the things that you've had the ability to do is draw on massive stocks of corals, and that are hundreds or thousands of years old. And how has that enhanced your business's viability?
Well, my father bought 1960 the biggest coral factory never existing was the Raffaele Costa in Genova. He bought it, and it takes 6 months to bring from Genova to Naples this amazing quantity of shaka coral that we keep in our deposit, and we never sell. We are still working that coral that is full of history, because it's not a bank of coral, it's a deposit where there are slide 30-meter high of coral and each line has different coral. So maybe in one line we can understand if there was earthquake or volcanic movement that burned the coral. And using a different coral now, we are bringing the contemporary art in the coral for the first time, and we have made, together with the #1 in the world contemporary artist existing, that is Jan Fabre, making some pieces that we rewrite the story of a coral.
Sarah, how does Gemfield's stance of responsible sourcing relate to the Fabergé of today? And does that play a role in the thinking surrounding the life of the heritage brand?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, we are fortunate in that Gemfields owns the Fabergé company, but of course we both have our own personalities. However, the responsible sort of stones is very beneficial to us, and so we have that opportunity to tell our customers we know where our stones come from mine to market, and I think that is a very good partnership that we have. So Gemfields, obviously, it's not a finite resource, so it's responsible sourcing, we would say, but also looking at the impact on the communities in those areas. And I know Gemfields are very strong in that area. So for Fabergé to be able to have that opportunity to have these beautiful stones which have their provenance is a very good way for us to go forward.
The notion of community impact brings up sort of another, if you will, dimension of the SDGs, and that would be gender, which we've referenced before. And Alice, I'm wondering, this would be Alice Vanni, what's the specific engagement, well, actually, this is a gender and a non-gender question. What's the specific engagement initiated by your mother with respect to sustainability?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. As I start to say at the beginning, her journey as a woman at the beginning was not easy But it was not even easier when she started to talk about ethical supply chain and sustainable supply chain in 2005. Finding people that could agree and believing in such project at the time was super difficult. And at the time, she always tell me there were people laughing at her back saying, what business you can make out of this? But she, as I said, she has great determination, so she didn't stop there. And so in 2007, it has been formalized the first chain of custody project from a gold community in Honduras through the project that she was president of, Gold Lake IP. And that was a first achievement. And as I said, the people that were not believing in her started to take another consideration of her. And I like to say this because nowadays, fortunately, everyone talks about sustainability, sometimes for marketing and sometimes for reputation. But I like to say this because sustainability is also something you have to believe in. And she has been believing in that and fighting for that with lots of difficulties. And she achieved the objective. This first community was having access to proper technology, made in Italy technologies where the material was processed just with water, not chemical. The community had a school where children, as we know, in many cases, this ASM community are in remote areas and children usually cannot access to schools because they are too far. And so the family has to bring them with them. So what she did is to create also a school and a clinic for medical support, and also fun for this community. There were like events of football and creative situations. So that was the first example back in 2007. Nowadays, since we're talking about succession, like what I've been trying to deal and work with is finding again the proper partner to create this kind of community and projects all around the world where we can. And nowadays, we are still working on community projects. And we are partnering with stakeholders that are very valuable, like the United Nations, the OECD, and NGO and public authority from different countries. I can cite one of the projects is Planet Gold. And I'm saying that these projects are crucial because in this SDG path, we do watch at SDGs holistically. With one project like Planet Gold, where the main objective is to reduce and eliminate the mercury from the supply chain, actually you have amazing improvement for gender equality because you have women empowerment sections for every community they work with. You can have good impact for the biodiversity because one of the projects we are buying from in Planet Gold, which is for mine, had beautiful beehives in their mine. So like, it's important to engage with all the supply chain, and it's also important to partner because alone we cannot do that much, but together we can do better. And it's definitely beautiful to talk about this in a jewelry trade show because jewelers are the first one that we are open to work with because when you have the full chain of custody and the jewelers that buy this gold or silver can be proud because you can even tell to the final customer, look where this came from. Look, buying this, what you are doing actually. You're making a choice. So that was our first part, but now it's just that was just the beginning, let's say.
Alice, so again, coming back to your Minakari craftsman, the work you've done reveals, if you will, a gender divide in the industry and its impacts, which are certainly a concern that are directly tied to the UN SDG 5, which is about gender equality. How does culture play a role in the ability to pass tradition on? So what's the impact, if you will, of a culture in which there is, say, opting against passing on to a daughter who doesn't believe that a woman should work in a formal sector, or perhaps that the security of the family wisdom will be compromised?
I think it's more the latter than the former. I mean, my Minakari craftsman has 2 daughters and no son. And much like cooking, he doesn't teach them how to do his craft. So his mother doesn't teach the daughters, he doesn't teach the daughters, because ultimately they'll marry and they'll take both the cooking skill and the amazing kind of craft heritage into somebody else's family, and it will become their kind of heritage and their financial wealth and value, if you like. So whilst they are taught to do what he considers to be the kind of easiest skill of cloisonné, which, you know, you put a wire and you make a pattern, but you can pull it off if you make a mistake, he doesn't teach them how to do chanlevé, which is, you know, much more kind of elevated enamel craft in his eyes. So how do you know, how will he find a way to ensure a succession? You know, and it's quite an interesting craft, Jean-Levé, because he has, you know, boxes and cupboards full of little brass rubbings that his great-great-grandfather has taken of bits of work that he was particularly proud of. So he has a direct way to test his skill against somebody who was working 200 years ago. And so this wealth of knowledge and information is actually quite high as a result. He hasn't lost anything from generation to generation, even though his father died quite young and there were a few elements of the tradition that he wasn't able to pass on. He can at least learn from what he can see. And it sort of strikes me that actually there's a very important conversation to be had around how you capture and pass on the skill of the perhaps disorganized side of our business. You know, it's beautiful to hear Mario Bucciolati talking about the academy, to hear you talking about your academy, Enzo, but, you know, when there are, you know, these tiny, small-scale families that make up really quite a large proportion of people who make things in our business, what do we do for them to give them a path to pass on their knowledge when perhaps there are elements of their cultural traditions that make that kind of less feasible?
Well, in the words of my predecessor, Ed Johnson, we are looking at coming to the end of our time. And so I have one final question, and I'm going to ask each of you a different version of it that's applicable to your story, if you will. I'd like you to answer it briefly, and then if there's any question from the audience, we will have a minute to turn to you. So, one of the things that, you know, is becoming evident is the relationship between a vibrant future and mindfulness of cultural heritage and environmental and social resources. So, given your extraordinary situation, Enzo, what is the historic legacy of Torre del Greco in the coral business? And can you explain, for example, the museum that you've developed?
The museum was an idea of my father, taking the private collection that my grandfather started to put on site. And then when we traveled together, me and my father, we went to Japan, to Hong Kong, to China, United States. We joined auction. And whenever we found coral pieces, we buy. And this gives the possibility to increase the private collection. Then we started collaboration with some creator of a piece of art with gold, diamond, and coral. And what we produce, we buy back. And is what we are doing now with Jan Faber. We produce a lot of artwork, and then we will take or buy back from him for our museum. But there is one thing very important, is when I was a student, I didn't like the history. What I feel is something not live, not... Then, in the last couple of years, during the pandemic, I have nothing to do, and I found all the historical archive of the Costa company, the biggest coral company that was in Genoa. And together with my son, we found something unbelievable as invoice made the last century, letter, document, something incredible, and the quantity was amazing. So as we are in touch with a foundation in Naples called Piemonte della Misericordia, where we donate some few pieces of coral, they have a digital lab. So we agreed that we donate to them all these documents. They will, of course, repair part of it because very, very old, starting from beginning of last century. And then they will digitalize and put online so people can make a search, the story can be changed thanks to this. So the museum can be from one side something live. So we have example of we have a section of what was made in Sicily a couple of centuries ago, what was made in Naples as jewelry. Then we have antique and modern piece from China, from Japan, from Tibet, Nepal, from all parts of the world. And this is very important to let people know how the coral was used. And this can give inspiration also to the designer. I remember that once a year come to visit me a very famous designer that worked for Pomellato, Sergio Silvestris. And when Sergio came, he said, Enzo, can you leave me a couple of hours here? And after he went out with some idea. So that museum can inspire even the designer. Now the designers are very important all over the world. All the world needs designer.
So thank you so much, Enzo. So Sarah, sort of turning to you, what would you like to see as Fabergé's legacy, and how does that relate to the story that Fabergé has to tell?
Well, I guess we're just caretakers, as somebody mentioned, I think earlier about big names. So we're caretakers. So I hope that we caretake it well, that we continue to champion those skills that we were talking about that can so easily be lost, forgotten, and never resurrected. So to bring forward the skills of the guilloche enamel, celebrating fine craftsmanship, design, and storytelling, and writing another chapter, I suppose. That's what we're doing really, is we're writing another chapter of Fabergé, and I hope that legacy will be that people do know that Fabergé didn't just die back in 1917, but that it continued to move forward, that it championed those skills, the creativity, and that, as Enzo was saying, to inspire other designers to continue that forward. So we're caretaking, we're hoping that we do a good job as we go along right now, and then that to leave it again for the next generation. I mean, my son has joined our company, but also for the wider audience to be inspired by Fabergé continually, and to know that it wasn't just dusty, that it moved on.
Brilliant. So Alice Cicolini, whose responsibility is it to ensure that highly skilled artisanry is carried on? And what role does ensuring the preservation of these skills play in your legacy? And it may play none. There's no mandate in the question.
So, I mean, in Hindi, Meenakari means the secret. And it's a beautiful idea about the poetry of enamel being something that's a conversation between you and your jewelry. It's always on the back, so only you know it's there. And it's an idea that kind of falls all across my work in many different ways. But I think my passion is to stop the craftsman being a secret also. So I always talk about my craftsmen. You know, Kamal Assad is as much an important part of my public profile as my own work as a designer. And I talk about my British craftsmen as much in the same context. But it's not my role individually on my own as a tiny business to ensure the survival of a whole community of practice. And I mean, you know, I'm not sure that I know the answer, but as a kind of diplomat and former bureaucrat, I suppose there are all sorts of ways of aggregating people together to ensure that the narrative of practice is a kind of contemporary thing in the way that we talk about jewellery. So reminding people across the world that skill is a critical part of our business and is part of the thing that they pay for. You know, when I first started working in fair trade metal over a decade ago, people were telling me I was crazy. No one's going to pay for that, they said. But of course now people do. But I think that's also very important in what can be quite a confusing marketplace around the perception of value, to remind people that inherently what they're buying is generational skill that is transferred from, you know, one person to another, and that takes time and respect.
Right. And also sort of a Whistlerian aggregation.
Yeah.
You know, it's not for the time it takes me to paint, but for the years that I've invested.
100%.
Yeah. So given the kind of nexus that we're talking about here between materiality and social value, I think, Alice, I'd like to close this particular question with you. And how do you see the project of peace building, Rondine Cittadella della Pace, in terms of Italpreziosi's legacy?
Thank you for the question. Like Rondine Cittadella della Pace for me, for Mom, and for Italpreziosi, and for many here, it's crucial. It's not renowned still, and we are fighting to make the voice of a project like this bigger and bigger. Because when we do business, it's not just about the supply chain, it's not just about specific interest you might have, it's about the holistic view of sustainability. Peace building is one of the SDGs, and Ivana, since a decade, my mom, is supporting Rondine Cittadella della Pace, which is a peace building project set in Arezzo. And it has been also nominated for the Peace Nobel Prize in 2015. What is it about? It's about giving voice to young generation coming from countries that are in conflict, make them live together and understand that the enemies is just a perception. And this is 20 years old, this project, and is now recognized by the UN. Ivana, my mother, is the president of the Entrepreneurs of Peace, because yes, we can have also entrepreneurs working for peace, and giving the chance to youth to go back also in their homeland and spread the crucial importance of dialogue and peace building. So thank you for the question and for taking Rondine as the final point, because especially in a period we are living where peace is urgent and is not something we can forget to talk about, we need to support initiatives that are spreading the voice for this. So for those that are also here and more interested in know about it and want to support the peace action, we will be more than happy to give you more information also. And as Italpreziosi, we are working with them a lot, supporting financially, but also trying to create internships programs, because these students are coming from all around the world, from also difficult countries. And you know that the primary source of materials usually come from high-risk areas and countries. And what we can do is engage holistically, in as much as areas we can, from human rights, environment, but also peace building.
Thank you. So what we've done in this panel has basically been to look at four core issues. One being the relation, really succession as sustainability, and if you will, the mechanics, for lack of a more elegant term, of successful transition and succession. And there is, of course, a relationship between succession and succeed, to follow, to succeed, to accomplish. The second one, the transmission of values and the relationship between future-directed nature of succession and the heritage upon which it draws. The third being a consideration of the relationship between the idea of a sustained organization and the principles of responsible practice with regard to environment and society, also referred to as sustainability. And the fourth one being the relationship between a vibrant future and cultural heritage and what your own individual perception of legacy is for either your practice or the entity that you represent. I think we have 2 minutes, given the timekeeping that was in practice. And before taking any question that might be from the audience, I'd like to very much thank CIBJO for this wonderful opportunity, first opportunity, to be part of this vibrant, vital community, and to say how much I look forward to learning more, to contributing more, and to participating in an effective way in the future. So thank you very much, Gaetano and Steve, and also Edward Johnson. And please, if anyone has a question, we would love to take it. Iris.
Thank you, Lisa. Iris van der Vieken, Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030. First of all, I want to congratulate CIBJO for taking this topic on. I think this is probably a topic that needs to be touched at every opportunity that we can have around the world where we come together. At the end of the day, our industry is really, the heart are all family businesses. So how can we, accelerate governance, how we make decisions, how we drive transformation through a value-driven leadership, but also something what I thought was really amazing and that came out from all of you is about also the succession of knowledge transfer and especially the artisanal skills. And I think that's the beauty, right? You were honestly, we were talking, we could have listened to this for hours because we believe this is a really important topic. So I would just say congratulations, we truly enjoyed it. And I hope this is a call for action, that we can continue to have this discussion, but also have concrete actions. And maybe as a final thought, CIBJO is also a member of the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030. We have Alice here with Italpreziosi, member of the Watch and Jewellery Initiative, that this is also one of our topics that we are looking at and exploring, not just with brands, but also with schools. And schools not just in Italy, but all around the world, and how can we hopefully find a united approach to tackle this. So thank you again. It was really, really inspiring. We enjoyed it.
Thank you for your very kind comments. And this is an issue that I, for example, have been very interested and committed to. And I take up the challenge, and I would imagine that the sage eminences at CIBJO will as well. But thank you very much for your kind comments. Anybody else? We thank you very much for joining us this morning, whether now we're at midday here in Italy, wherever it is that you might be. I want to thank you for taking part of the morning and spending it with us. And wherever you might be, if you're watching online, I wish you a fabulous rest of the day. Today is Sunday, and so, take a moment and savor the day, because this is the one we have to live. Thanks so much for being with us. Take care. Bye-bye.